Hi everybody, this is Johnny. I put together some Cycle 2 CalTPA materials for you. I think these will help you to be successful. You can find a link to these materials in the description below this video. I've set out a set of Cycle 1 materials as well. Do visit my channel if you'd like to look at those. So this is an overview. You might use this guide as a way to move through Cycle 2. First off, you can find everything that I'm going to be talking about in this folder. You will see lots of good things here. The first thing is this overview that I'm going to be going through in this video is right here. I break down the rubrics both in a slideshow and in a doc. I take apart every one of the 9 rubrics. We'll talk about that in a moment. I've set out a knowledge base about assessment. There are 3 kinds of assessment you need to be thinking about: informal, self-assessment, and formal assessment. And I'll talk about that in a moment as well. Video is required for Cycle 2. I have 2 tools you might look at to help you move through the video and annotate them well. And then I have each one of the templates broken down into a workbook, and I'll give examples of these as well today. The first thing I suggest is you go to my rubric breakdowns. And this is the doc version of that breakdown. Remember, you want to be shooting for level 3 to get scores of 3. Level 4 will give you a score of 4, level 5, score of 5. 2s and 1s aren't great, so try to shoot for level 3. To get a level 3, you need to meet every one of the criteria that are set out in level 3. As you can see in this one, this is 2.1. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 criteria you need to meet. This one has more criteria than the others, so don't worry about the other ones. This one just asks a lot. You will see that I take each one of the criteria, color label it, and describe what it is over here on the left. So you can see each one of them is set out that way. If you want to push yourself a little bit, and lots of times it's worth it, look at what level 4 asks, because often level 4 asks for just a little bit more, and that can help your score. Or level 5 as well. Below each one of the rubrics, you'll see what kinds of evidence matters to this rubric. Most of them only have a couple things that matter. This first one with 7 different things, the evidence will be looked for in any one of these things. Okay? You can see a lot of it is about the things that you set out as materials for 2.1. I do this for rubric 2.2. You'll see 3 different criteria and my breakdown of each of those 3, level 4 and level 5, and the sources of evidence again as well. So I do this for each one of the rubrics, and this is the rubric breakdown. After you've given attention to the rubrics, I suggest you go to the knowledge base CalTPA Cycle 2. In this, I set out videos and texts that will help you with the key ideas that you're being assessed on in Cycle 2. Remember, there are 3 types of assessment that are focused on in Cycle 2: informal assessment, student self-assessment, and formal assessment. You will see that I've set out resources for student self-assessment, work around formative assessment or informal assessment, and then you'll also find resources about analyzing student work. I have more good things at the bottom here. What you should give particular attention to is this first one. It's a wonderful resource. It's about rubric types. A rubric is central to your work on Cycle 2, so knowing how they work and how to make one. You don't have to make it wholly new, but how to make a good one and work for this Cycle 2 is a good thing to be doing. So do give this good attention. There are other things that show up in the requirements. Adjusting instruction is one of the requirements in the rubrics, and giving good feedback is another requirement as well. So give these things good attention. After you've given attention to the knowledge base, I suggest you go to analysis of informal and student self-assessments. This is a workbook, and I do this for each one of the templates that's required in Cycle 2. In these, I give good attention to things that matter. I also give you a little space to write things out that you might later transfer to your templates. And in these, I take every one of the prompts and break them down. So for this first one, this is the analysis of informal and student self-assessments. It's giving attention to 2 of the kinds of assessments that are at the focus of Cycle 2. For this first prompt, you'll see that I take it apart, I discuss it a bit, and then I give you starting sentences, ways to think about it or write to the prompt. I also take care to address all the features of the prompt. If there's an and, that means this prompt may look like it's asking one question, but it's maybe asking two or three. In this case, you can see that there's an and here, and this prompt also is asking you about adjusting instruction. So you want to address all the parts. And with each prompt, I give you a little room and some prompts to help you organize your ideas towards that prompt. You will see that I do this with each one of the prompts. Again, what to think about, some sentence starters, and at the bottom, a frame for you to write up some ideas for yourself. After you've looked through analysis of informal and student self-assessments, give attention to the other kind of assessment that matters, analysis of formal assessment results. And you'll see this is a workbook as well. This is very central to the work you do on Cycle 2. You're going to be analyzing your students' work, setting out results in a template or a table, using your rubric, or considering this a rubric as well. Then, using the information that you've set out in this table, you're going to be doing an analysis of this. And here the prompts are all about your analysis. A lot of this is about evidence, so give good attention to the evidence you suggest. So you'll see that I suggest you use both the table above and student work examples in analysis of the work in that table from above. I give you attention to what matters, some framing for how you might write to this, and of course, some space to write out what you're thinking. I will do this for every prompt on this one, and I hope it's helpful to you. So after you've looked at these two workbooks for templates, you've not taught anything yet. I suggest you start thinking about your planning, and here's the workbook for the lesson segment. Now in Cycle 2, you're teaching multiple lessons, but there's a frame that you're supposed to use or should use to describe each one of the lessons in your learning segment. And you can see right here, this is from the assessment guide, 3 to 5 lessons in the learning series. And then I take their framework and break it down. The first thing they care about are the standards. So I've given you links to the standards here. And then for each one of your lessons, you're going to be filling out a table that looks like this. And these are the prompts on the left for that lesson plan for each one of your lessons that you're doing in this learning sequence. And for each one of these, you can see that based on this, I give you a little bit of direction here. Content learning goals, what you do, and maybe a sentence starter for you. Essentially the same for each of these. Some of these require a bit more attention, so I lay out more things for you to think about and sentence starters to frame things. You can see that this one requires a bit more evidence and assessment of learning and informal assessment, student self-assessment, formal assessment. And I do this for every one of the prompts for the lesson plan frame that CalTPA sets out for you. And as you can see, I give you some ways to think about that so you can make good lesson plans for each one of the lessons in your learning sequence. My suggestion that after you've planned your lessons, you do a think aloud rehearsal of your lessons with your peers or mentor teacher to refine your plans. This is especially useful if your peers are doing Cycle 2 as well, because then you can talk to each other about the necessary elements in your teaching for these lessons. You still have not taught, and before you do teaching, you should think about what the video requirements are and be ready for them before you teach your lesson. So I've set out some video annotation tools for you. The first one is a workbook. And I'm going to say this is really, really important. What I've done is I've taken apart the rubrics and found the 8 things that are required in your video. So the 8 things that are required: first one, students engaging in the topic with attention to academic language. Second, students using some kind of educational technology. The third one, you setting out informal assessment focused on student engagement with higher order thinking. The fourth one, you making a change in your teaching, adjusting instruction in response to an informal assessment. The fifth one, you using or going over the rubric with students. The sixth one, students engaged in some kind of informal assessment. Seventh one, you giving feedback based on what you learned from the student self-assessment. And the eighth one, you giving feedback based on informal assessment. You want to work to have all of these elements in your lessons and captured on video somehow. I follow this by going through each one of the annotations. There are only 4 of them this time, which is kind of a blessing. Assessing student learning and development of academic language, and I describe some things about it. This is not just about vocabulary, but about how kids talk about the topic in a rich way. And the second one's about educational technology. I give you some ideas here. This one tends to be a problem for people, especially people who are working, teachers who are working with young children. There may be smart ways to work around it. This third one I describe as a bit of a mess because it asks way too many different things. But you can see how I describe this. And the fourth one, there's only 4, which is a good thing, is just about how you manage and give feedback. And then I give you some direction about these as well. I follow with the rubrics and how the annotations fit with the rubrics. So this first annotation fits with rubric 2.3. Rubric 2.3 is asking you about assessing student learning and development of academic language. And then you can see students using educational technology fits with rubric 2.4. And then you can see the next one, informal assessments, all about rubric 2.5. And then 2.6, providing content-rich feedback. 2.7 is about feedback as well. So do look at the rubrics and think about where the video annotations should show up. You should follow this by teaching your lessons. My suggestions: have a peer or mentor record for you. Emphasize the audio. What is said by you, between you and your students, between your students, has a great deal of weight for the video annotations. Give particular attention to capturing you going over the rubric and to the feedback you give students during your teaching. Record every lesson in its entirety. You should afterwards go back over the video annotation workbook, reviewing those 4 annotations and where they might fit. And then, by yourself first perhaps, and then with peers or mentors, you might use this tool to think about the annotations. I start with going through each one of the annotations again. There's the first one, the second one, the third one, and I give the description below, and the fourth one on feedback. And then below here, I give you some tables. Here's an example table I set out for you to think about how you mark up your video to make sure you get your annotations in the right places. So there's 4 of them: assessment in academic language, educational technology, higher order thinking and adjusting instruction, and feedback. My suggestion is you think of higher order thinking and adjusting instruction as 2 things that fit with the same annotation. Anytime you work some kind of higher order thinking with your kids, you should probably use that annotation. Anytime you make a purposeful adjustment in instruction, use that annotation. I give you some space to work things out. This is another table. Or you might use this table below too. This table is another way of organizing yourself for annotations. You can see I've set out the things that show up: academic language, educational technology, higher order thinking, adjusting instruction and feedback, and you might make timestamps, and you might give yourself some kinds of descriptions, the kind of descriptions that you want to write out in the annotations before you submit. And there's tables here to help you with that. After you've given attention to the video, you might begin work on the template workbooks. And as I said, I have a template workbook for each one of the templates that are required in CalTPA Cycle 2. And if we take a look at this one, this is Workbook H. As I've said before, I give you the prompt, and then I'll give you lots of ways to think about it. I hope these will be helpful to you. And don't forget that these are good spaces. These tables are good places to write out your ideas before you set them out in the template that you're going to be submitting. Do revisit your annotations on your video using the 2 tools that I've given you. And then when you're getting toward the end of your work on this, do go back to the 8 rubric breakdowns. Do a self-assessment by thinking about each one of the criteria that I've marked out in each one of the rubrics. And as I said, that first one has many, but you can see 2.2 has 3 criteria. 2.3 has just 1 criterion. 1 solid criterion for 2.4, 2 for 2.5. Use these as a way to self-assess your work on CalTPA Cycle 2. And lastly, share your work with your peers. All of my students who've had good success work with peers really, really well and constantly throughout the process of doing Cycle 2. Talk through and check through their work with them. Have them do the same for you. And when you're in a good place, go ahead and submit it. I set these materials out for your success. Do use them as you need, and I wish you the best with Cycle 2.